Welcome back to Weird NASCAR Rumors. Recently, we looked at the forgotten Ricky Rudd sweepstakes from 2002, but today, let's look at some other things that happened in 2002. So, 2002 was the first full year that I followed NASCAR, and I was just a kid, so silly season stories were a bit over my head at the time. Looking back on it now, I see just how interesting that year was. There is a lot to unpack here, and actually, there is so much that I'm going to have to split this video up into two parts. So, this is part one. Let's start with some big shakeups that were talked about with Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. In 2002, DEI was negotiating new contracts with Napa and Pennzoil. There was particularly a concern that Napa was going to be leaving, as there was talk that other teams were bidding for Napa's sponsorship. Either way, both Michael Waltrip and Steve Park were on the hot seat. In May, Elliott Sadler was seeking a way out of his deal with the Wood brothers, and while that would eventually lead him to Yates, at first the talk was that he was going to be headed to DEI and bringing with him an $11 million sponsorship from the WWE. Dale Earnhardt Incorporated Executive VP Ty Norris did confirm that discussions were had with Sadler. Actually, there were rumors that Steve Park was set to be released in June, and that Sadler could join DEI mid-season if that was the case. But Sadler was not the only driver connected to DEI around this time. Matt Kenseth was another name that was thrown around as well. Kenseth was young and pretty sought after at this time, having been linked to RCR and Evernham just the year before. Check out my Weird NASCAR Rumors video on 2001 for more on that. Matt Kenseth had a good relationship with Dale Earnhardt Jr., and DEI saw him as someone with a lot of talent, but was low-key enough that he wouldn't overshadow Dale Jr. on the team. There was a brief rumor that Jerry Nadeau was being looked at as well. There were actually two other interesting names that were linked to DEI, though not to take over the 1 or the 15 cars full-time. Kenny Brack, the 1998 IndyCar champion who was competing for Chip Ganassi in kart at the time, was connected to DEI, though it was really only rumored that he would be testing one of their cars. And there was also a report in the Indianapolis Star that the team may be finalizing a deal with Sam Hornish Jr. to run part-time in the Busch Series for them, along with a cup race or two. I'll have more on Sam Hornish Jr. in part 2. Next, we have one of the more interesting and frankly ironic rumors that I've seen since starting this series. So there was talk that Joe Gibbs Racing might be switching manufacturers from Pontiac to Chevy mid-season in 2002, or actually switching between Chevys and Pontiacs based off of what track they were at. Now, this would have been tricky for sure, but maybe not as tricky as you might think at first glance. Keep in mind, Pontiac and Chevy were both GM brands, so it wasn't like they would be switching from a GM brand to Ford or Dodge. But for a team that was destined to win a championship with Tony Stewart that year, a mid-season switch would have been a bizarre move. Apparently, this stemmed from some sort of drama over the NASCAR rules package and how, according to some, the current rules package kept Pontiac teams at a disadvantage. And it wasn't just JGR that was frustrated with NASCAR about this, but all of the Pontiac teams, apparently. In early March, Tony Stewart's crew chief Greg Zipadelli said that a move to Chevy was in the cards, being quoted by the Winston-Salem Journal as saying, "It is being built, and you'll see in about 4 weeks." That led to speculation that Tony Stewart could be driving a Chevy as soon as the race at Texas Motor Speedway in early April. At this point, JGR had built a Chevy to be used in-house to compare against their Pontiacs in the wind tunnel. There was also a new Pontiac that was being designed for the 2003 season at this point, so GM officials did acknowledge that JGR wanted to be able to compare the Monte Carlo to the new Grand Prix as well. A few weeks after these reports emerged, Bobby Labonte wrecked while testing at Texas Motor Speedway. And when the team rolled out the backup car, it was a Chevy. Team president J.D. Gibbs said that they were simply testing out the Chevy to see what it had to offer, and insisted that JGR was not going to be leaving Pontiac, and that the team was helping to develop the new 2003 Grand Prix. About a month later, there was an odd situation where it seemed like the writing was on the wall that Gibbs was going to be going to Chevy for the 2003 season, even if that meant no mid-season switch. But they were still testing the 2003 Pontiac at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Gibbs still denied these reports at the end of May, but by mid-July, the move was official, and Gibbs actually said that they would be using both Pontiacs and Chevys during testing sessions for the remainder of the season, and that they could be running Chevys at tracks where they felt like the Chevy tested better. Just a couple of days later, they followed through on the testing part of this, with Tony Stewart and Bobby Labonte splitting the testing session at Indianapolis between Chevy and Pontiac. The Chevy was actually faster, and a report emerged that at least Tony Stewart was likely to drive a Chevy at the Brickyard coming up a couple of weeks later. This was denied by Greg Zipadelli, but he did add that they might run a Chevy at Michigan. Ultimately, it didn't happen. It was determined that a move like this to run Chevys at some racetracks and make them competitive would have cost the team more than $500,000, and it just wasn't worth the investment. The great irony in all of this is that Tony Stewart would go on to drive his number 20 Pontiac to a Cup Series championship later that year, in spite of all of this manufacturer drama. But that wasn't the only drama surrounding Tony Stewart that year, and no, I'm not referring to him almost losing his ride and Home Depot sponsorship after hitting a photographer at Indianapolis. I'm referring to two more silly season rumors, because it seems like he was rumored to be going somewhere throughout the entirety of the early 2000s. In April, there was a report that Jerry Jones, yes, the Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, was inquiring about Stewart's availability, as he was in an ultimately failed process of buying into Andy Petree Racing. For more on that possible partnership between Jones and Andy Petree, check out my video on the Ricky Rudd sweepstakes, where I talk about it more in depth and talk about how Ricky Rudd was rumored to be heading there. This would have been a terrible move for Tony Stewart in my eyes. Obviously, Joe Gibbs Racing was a championship caliber team. By the end of 2002, not only would Tony Stewart win a championship, but it would be JGR's second championship in just 3 years. Andy Petree Racing had 2 victories to their name, but they were far from a championship caliber team. And I don't care how much money Jerry Jones pumped into that team, it was not going to be anywhere near JGR's level right away. Again, I'm not going to dive too deep into this because I already did in my other video, so go check that one out for more. The other Tony Stewart silly season rumor had a Ricky Rudd tie-in as well. There was a rumor that Stewart had signed a deal to partner with Chip Ganassi Racing and Texaco Havoline for the 2004 season. The idea was that Ricky Rudd was going to be going to Ganassi's 42 car on a 1-year deal with Texaco, and then Tony Stewart would take over the ride in 2004, with Rudd presumably retiring. Again, for more on the Rudd to Ganassi fiasco, and there was a fiasco involved, check out my video on the Ricky Rudd sweepstakes in the Weird NASCAR Rumors playlist linked in the description. Also, this was not the first time that Tony Stewart to Ganassi was talked about, as just a year before, there was a rumor that he could be headed to Ganassi to drive the number 41 car. Check out my Weird NASCAR Rumors 2001 video for more on that. I'm actually going to say something here that I also said in that video. I think that Tony Stewart could have won a championship at Chip Ganassi Racing. I think that for a very brief window in the early 2000s, Chip Ganassi Racing had all of the right pieces in place to be a championship caliber team. Sterling Marlin was spectacular in 2002 and a serious championship threat until his injury at Kansas. A driver lineup of Marlin and Stewart in 2002 would have been formidable. Unfortunately, I think the championship caliber strength ended after 2002 for a couple of reasons. One, Sterling Marlin never was the same after coming back from that injury. And 2, as the team expanded to 3 cars in 2003, Ganassi partnered Marlin with 2 rookies in Jamie McMurray and Casey Mears. I think that Ganassi could have remained a championship caliber team if Ricky Rudd had actually signed to drive the 42 car, and then they had put Jamie McMurray in the 41 to have a driver lineup of Ricky Rudd, Sterling Marlin, and Jamie McMurray. Then McMurray could have spent a year being mentored by both Rudd and Marlin, and then you bring over Tony Stewart in 2004. The Stewart, Marlin, and McMurray lineup is a powerhouse team in 2004. And let's just throw it out there because I love speculating as part of this series. Let's say Ricky Rudd greatly outperforms Sterling Marlin, and the decision is made to retain Rudd and say goodbye to Marlin in favor of Tony Stewart in the 40 car after 2003. A Stewart Rudd McMurray lineup is also spectacular in 2004. I think that if Chip Ganassi had signed Ricky Rudd and Tony Stewart came over in 2004, there is still a good chance that we see Smoke competing for championships there. I should also mention that excluding Casey Mears from all of this isn't me looking down on him. I just think that 2 rookies in a 3-driver lineup was too much for Ganassi in 2003. And also, I think that Mears could have really benefited from another year or 2 in the Busch Series. If you look at his rookie year in 2003, his best finish was 15th. He had an average finish of 30th with just 7 lead lap finishes, and he finished 35th in points. He had only run 1 full Busch Series season to that point and finished 21st in points. I think that more development time would have really been good for him. I'm also going to talk about the whole 41 car saga a lot more in part 2 for this video, so stay tuned for that. Like I said at the top of the video, there was way more going on in the 2002 season than I realized, so to keep this video from going too long, I'm going to save the rest for part 2. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Until part 2, have a great day.